Okay. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in to the very first episode of the Betterment Blueprint. Today we're going to be talking about the power of planning. And I'm going to be outlining throughout the course of the episode 3 different mindsets and 3 different practices that are going to help you master your time. Now, a little bit of background about me. For the last 10 years, I have been building and perfecting a productivity system that not only honors my big overarching goals that I have for my life, but is detailed enough to handle the rigors and the detail of the day-to-day. I think when it comes to a lot of the other productivity systems that other people have built that I've been using, they're always lacking in one or the other. They're usually not built for both the big things in life and the details of the day-to-day. And the system that I've kind of developed over the last 10 years includes both. And it's not really something that I've built. It's not like an app or anything. It's an integration of a couple of different resources, all of which are free and all of which are really simple and easy to use. And as I've gotten better and better at using it, it's really helped me accomplish more than I ever thought possible. And I think that it can help you accomplish more than you've ever thought possible too. But before we get into that, I think it's really important that you know a little bit about my story and why this is so important to me. When I was a kid, talking middle school, high school, when I started to get a little bit more serious about school, I was a total airhead. I could not keep things straight in my mind. I was extremely disorganized. I'd always be losing things. I would never know when anything was happening. I didn't know when tests were happening. I didn't know when my friends' birthdays were. I didn't know when my birthday was. I would forget my girlfriend's anniversary, or I guess our anniversary. And I would get into a lot of trouble because of my lack of organization. And honestly, it kind of sucked because I knew I was an intelligent person. I just wasn't an organized person. And I'm guessing that if you're listening to this or if you're watching this, that's probably something that you can relate to. That feeling of just like, you know that you're capable of doing so much. You know that you're capable of doing things. You know that you're smart. You know that you're determined. You just, for whatever reason, can't get it together. And I think that for a lot of people, and myself especially, it just came down to an organization issue. I wasn't lacking in ambition. I wasn't lacking in intelligence. I just didn't have a useful way to direct all of that energy. And this is something I want you to think about. It's a metaphor. It's really simple. If you take a person of average intelligence, or even if you take a person of high intelligence and you ask them to mow a lawn, but all you gave them to mow that lawn was a Fisker's pair of safety scissors, right? Obviously, this person, regardless of how intelligent they are, they're going to take forever to mow the lawn because they're having to cut each piece of grass individually. And on top of that, when they're done, the lawn's going to look horrible, right? Because lawns look good because everything is uniform and you got those nice little rows, and you can't really do that at all with a pair of safety scissors. And if that person were to look at their lawn, or I guess your lawn, that you gave them to mow with a pair of safety scissors, and they looked at your neighbor's lawn who actually used a lawnmower, they would probably feel pretty bad about the job that they just did. And it would have nothing to do with their ability or their intelligence. It was because they got a terrible tool to do the job. Right? And if you gave that same person, you didn't change anything about them, but you gave them an actual lawnmower, they would probably get done a lot faster and they'd probably do a lot better of a job. And the better the tool that you give them, even without changing anything else about them, you gave them one of those nice lawnmowers that you can sit on and ride around and listen to your music, they'd probably feel like a king and they'd do a good job and they'd have fun doing it. And I think that planning and getting stuff done and productivity comes down a lot to the type of tools that you're using and the way that you're using them. And I think unfortunately a lot of us kind of default to using our brains for the long-term and unending job of keeping track of a million different things that are constantly changing, and the things that our brains are just not the best tool for the job. Our brains confuse things. Our brains forget things. Our brains conflate things, meaning they confuse things for each other. And our brains also don't have a very great sense of time. The sense of time that our minds work on, as I'm sure you know, is totally independent of actual 24-hour clock time, right? I'm sure you've sat on the couch on your phone scrolling on Instagram and somehow 2 or 3 hours have passed. But to you, it's only felt like 20, 30 minutes, right? But when you're in a meeting, that's only 30 minutes long and you sat there for 15 minutes and it feels like 3 hours have dragged by. Our perception of time is totally subjective. And not only do our brains do this on the short term, we do this on the long term too, right? If you think about the last 5 years of your life or the last era of your life that you're in, for me, that was college. And I think about, wow, it's been like 5 or so years since I got out of college. Like, that's crazy. Time went by so fast, right? But I think about the last year of my life since I moved to Austin, and it has felt a lot longer than the time that I spent, those 5 years that I spent between college and now versus the last year of my life. The last year feels way longer than those 5 years. And I'm just giving you different examples of the fact that our brains are just, when it comes to the concrete job of just keeping track of things, our brains are not very good at it. And I bring all of this up because I just want to say that there's nothing wrong with you. You're not stupid. You're not slow. You're not incapable of doing great things. You've just been using the wrong tool for the job. And once you start using the right tool, you're going to feel so much better. The overwhelm, the frustration, the anxiety about managing your day-to-day life, and the feelings of purposelessness that for so many people seem to permeate everything will become a thing of the past. For me, my journey towards organization and planning really began in high school. I think I was a freshman and my life was a mess. I felt constantly overwhelmed and I felt like I had no direction in my life. And I know that for a lot of my friends at the time, and even a lot of my friends now, many years later, still feel those things. That lack of organization, the constant overwhelm, the lack of direction. And it's a real drag on your mental health. It was a real drag on mine, and it caused me a lot of anxiety. And I remember, I think I was just searching online. There was a personal development coach that I followed. His name is Darren Hardy. And he published a quick little 15-minute video every day. And I would watch those videos in the morning. That's how I would start my day while I was drinking my morning tea. And there was one video that he published about using a Google Calendar. Specifically, I think it's specifically about time blocking, which is a concept we'll get into later. But watching that video blew my mind. It never occurred to me to take the things outside of that were in my mind and take them outside of my mind. It never occurred to me to outsource the job of keeping track of things. And the system that I'm about to go over with you is essentially just an extreme version of that. It's about outsourcing as much of the logistical tasks in your life as possible so that you can use as much brain power as is available to you for the tasks in your life that are actually really difficult and that take a lot of creative thinking. And so I have sunk probably at least $1,000 at this point trying out different software, different hardware, and many hours. Many failed hours, I guess, depending on how you look at it. of just trying to use different things and just trying to keep track of things. And I think the things that I learned are really important is that while it needs to be robust enough to handle a lot of information and a lot of moving parts, it still needs to be simple enough to update. It can't take a whole hour to manage your management system. You know what I mean? That very quickly becomes problematic depending on how complex your life is. And it's really important that you associate simplicity and an anxiety-free experience with your time management system, because otherwise you won't use it. You won't see the point. You won't feel the point. Even if you know it might help, you'll abandon it when things get difficult. When what you really need to do is the exact opposite, right? You need to lean on your systems when things get difficult. So the other thing that I think is really important before I get into the details of the system is I'm just going to go over some mindsets and some practices that I think are really important that make the system work. I could give you my system. I could tell you every piece of it, but if you're not approaching it with the right mindsets, it's not really going to work for you. And the point of this isn't even necessarily for you to copy my system, although you're more than welcome to do that. It's more to give you some ideas on how you can create a system that works for you. For me, 99% of my system is online and software based. But I know people who are much more productive than me, and everything they do is on paper, right? They use a planner, they use a journal, they use written out lists, and that just clicks for them in their brain. And for me, I find that tedious and I find that difficult. So don't take my system as law. It's just what's worked for me. I think what's really important is listen to what I do and take the pieces of that will work best for you and leave the rest. Okay, so mindset number 1. Planning is the vehicle through which you make your goals and dreams a reality. Okay, this is kind of about just understanding how important planning is as a concept. And this is especially for those of you who don't necessarily see a whole lot of value in planning yet. I think a lot of us have heard that phrase of how a goal without a plan is just a wish. Having a system is the planning part. And I want you to think about how important this is, right? If planning is the skill that allows you to turn your goals and dreams into a reality, then the better you get at planning, the better you will get at making your reality your reality. It's literally what will allow you to bring your dreams and goals into life. And if you have all of these, these desires of, making lots of money or being in a relationship or living in a particular type of place or living in a particular type of lifestyle or having a certain type of friend, whatever it may be, planning is the way that you make that happen. Okay, otherwise you're just subject to the comings and goings of the life and the environment around you, and you're also subject to the comings and goings of your internal environment as well, which, if you're anything like me, is not stable whatsoever. There's some days I wake up and I'm super driven and determined to do some good for myself and for the rest of the people in this world, and there are other days where I don't care about anything. I don't care about other people. I definitely don't care about myself, and I'm definitely not going to do any work. Okay, and I think that's just part of the human condition. And it's important not to rely on that. Definitely take advantage of it when the wind is blowing in your sails, but when it's not, you got to have something to fall back on. Okay, and that's what a plan is for. Right? And the beautiful thing about planning when it comes to dreams and goals, say you want to increase your income by twice. Say you make, $40,000, $50,000 a year, like the salary of a teacher, and you want to double that. Well, that's a crazy goal. That's a crazy dream. To go from 50 to 100 is pretty significant, right? And it seems impossible. It seems like not really something that you can do or accomplish. But when you break it down and you create a step-by-step process, and you put it in your calendar, and you check in with it week in and week out, it becomes really doable. You can accomplish some pretty crazy things if you just make a plan. And it doesn't matter how far out of reach something initially is. You make that plan, and you follow that plan, and you're flexible enough to adapt, but strict enough to stick to it. I promise you, you will accomplish almost everything you want. And the best thing is that planning is not even all that complicated. You cannot plan wrong. Okay, you can only plan better. And that's something that is really, really important to get in your mind. Any planning is better than nothing. And you can't plan wrong. There are certainly some ways of planning that are more effective or more efficient or might work for you better. And you should always strive to improve your planning systems because, like I said, this planning is a skill and it's a vehicle through which you bring things about in your life, but you can't do it wrong. Okay? You cannot do it wrong. And anyone who tells you otherwise, they're the wrong ones. Okay? So even if you do a quote unquote poor job of planning, still do it. It's still valuable. Okay? Mindset number 2. Plans are a suggestion and not a promise. This is a little bit of a counterintuitive one, but it's also one of my more favorite ones because if you've ever made a plan for anything, you find out pretty quick that usually those plans things don't go to plan. Okay? There's a really famous quote, often attributed to Dwight D. Eisenhower during World War II. It's actually a lot older and comes from someone else. But it's very simple. It goes, no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And Mike Tyson put this quote in, I think, a much funnier way. He said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And my version of that, which is a little more technical, is plans are a static interpretation of an otherwise dynamic future. Okay, your plans are a snapshot of what your intentions and ideas were for how you wanted to spend your time in the past looking forward. And they do not and cannot accurately represent changes in the situation, changes in your goals, or changes in progress. Okay, so whenever you sit down to make a plan, regardless of how far out you're planning, understand that you will not be following that plan to a T. Okay, and if you're making a plan to follow it to a T, you're setting yourself up for failure because that's not how the world works. Okay, I'm sure at least some of you, I think as a fairly relatable example, have tried to exercise or diet at some point in your life. Okay, maybe you were trying to eat more or exercise more. Maybe you were trying to eat less and exercise more. It doesn't really matter. Whatever it may be, you probably created some sort of plan. And I think most people's tendency is to create plans that are too strict. And you find out pretty quick that, maybe you plan on eating your equivalent grams of weight of protein. Maybe you plan on eating the same amount of grams of protein as your body weight in pounds, but you figure out pretty quick that that is a lot of protein. Or you go hang out with your friends and they're getting dessert and you're the only one who's not getting dessert. Or you end up going on a date and it's an ice cream date. Or maybe you're budgeting, right? Budgeting is another pretty relatable one. And you set aside how much money you want to spend on whatever things, and then stuff pops up. Your car breaks down. You have to move apartments. You have to get a new job. You lose income for a little bit. You get sick. All of your friends are going on vacation, and you'll kick yourself if you don't go. Things happen, and you have to be adaptable, okay? That is part of the beauty of life, is that you never really know what's going to happen. That's what makes it fun. That's also what makes it scary, but that's what makes it fun too. And so when you're planning, remember that it's just a suggestion. And while you should do your best to follow these suggestions because they're manifestations of what you actually want out of your life, at the end of the day, you're not going to be able to do everything to plan. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's just how the world works, and that's how planning works. Okay, so this mindset's really important because it keeps you from feeling like a failure every time you deviate from your plan. Okay, deviation from the plan is not failure. It's just how the world works. Okay, and it also helps you stay flexible so that you can take advantage of and adapt to changing situations. Okay, sometimes your plan sucks. Sometimes you don't know what you're doing. Sometimes you don't really understand what it is that you're planning for, and things pop up, and you might need to change your plan in order to be successful. Change might be the only way that you succeed. And so you need to be flexible and adapt so that you can succeed. You might get new information about what qualifies as success. You might get new information on the strategy that you need to be using. Okay, I think a lot of people think that deviating from a plan is what leads to failure, but sometimes deviating from the plan is what leads to success. Okay, and that's why it's important to be flexible, to plan seriously, and then be okay with deviating from that plan when the time calls for it. Okay? And the mindset number 3. Mindset number 3 is that planning creates more freedom in your life, not less. Okay? When you create a plan for what you want to do, whether that's for the rest of the day or for the rest of the week or the rest of the month, gain the ability of oversight. And what I mean by oversight is you very clearly understand what you have time for and what you don't. And I'll just be honest with you, sometimes this can really suck. Okay? Planning blows any ignorance that you might have out of the water. Okay? So for example, you can, without much confusion, point to your plan and decide whether or not you have the capacity and the time and the energy to go out drinking with your friends Friday night because of what you already have planned for Saturday morning. If Saturday morning is free and empty, then feel free. You know, you can take that. You know you're going to need to sleep more. You know you're going to need time to just be hungover and sit like a sack of potatoes on the couch, and you'll be okay. It's not going to affect your plans. But if you know you got to work out Saturday morning, or you know you got to record a podcast Saturday morning, or you know you need to do some homework or study for a test, then you'll know that you won't be able to stay out too late Friday night. And sometimes that sucks. And I think a lot of people shy away from planning because they lose that ability to just be ignorant of what time they do and don't have, right? It's the same reason a lot of people shy away from budgeting, because once you start to budget and you start tracking your money, you know how much money you have, you know how much money you don't have, and you lose that ability to just be blissfully ignorant about your money. And I think that awareness that planning creates makes people feel like they're losing freedom. And I get it. I think I felt that way a lot at first as well, because it creates a necessity to say no to things, or it at least makes you feel guilty when you say yes to things that you know you shouldn't really be saying yes to. And you realize that you just don't have as much time as you'd like to believe. And that can be difficult to face. But the other thing that removing blissful ignorance from your life creates is it gives you awareness, right? And it prevents you from falling into the illusion of infinite time, which is a phenomenon where we as human beings lack awareness of how much time we have, and we almost always tend to assume that we have more time rather than less. That's why when you're not paying attention, it's so easy to be late to something. That's why it's easy to procrastinate on things, and that's why people often make changes in their lives far later than is ideal, okay? People don't have an epidemic of doing things too early. Okay, we have an epidemic of doing things too late. And that's just, again, another part of the human condition. For better or for worse, we tend to bias towards assuming we have more time than less. But when you have a detailed plan, you become acutely aware of how much time you actually have, both on a macro and a micro scale. And while that awareness is uncomfortable, it gives you the power to define what your priorities are and actually orient your life around these things. Okay, so that awareness is uncomfortable, but that awareness is what allows you to actually live your life the way that you want to. Okay, I think there's like 197 or 167 hours in a week. Okay, and when you start planning, for me, I do a lot of my planning on a Google Calendar. Okay, and I remember when I was a kid, realizing, I should probably, I want to sleep a reasonable amount every night. I want to wake up pretty early. I like working out early in the mornings. And so the first things that ever went on my calendar was sleep and workout. And I was waking up at 5 a.m. to work out, right? And the workout took like an hour to 2 hours, depending on what I was doing. So that went on the calendar. And I was sleeping 7 hours a night. This was when I was in high school. And the thing about waking up early, which I think a lot of people strive to do, is they don't really realize that to wake up early properly, you need to go to sleep early. And that could be tough. As an adult, it's definitely hard as a high schooler. That is prime time for getting work done. That's prime time for relaxing. I think as high schoolers, we're just so busy. We just have so much stuff. And of course, almost 7 or 8 hours of our day are just already set aside for school. And putting that 7-hour block of sleep on my calendar every day and that 1.5 hours of workout at 5 a.m. every day made me realize how much time I actually had, which was very little. And it kind of sucked at first, but it gave me the insight that I needed to actually prioritize my sleep and my exercise. And shortly thereafter, once I started really planning for my sleep and planning for my exercise and putting it on my calendar, I became pretty consistent with exercising and sleeping. And my freshman year of college, I ran my first marathon. And actually, I blew past the marathon mark and ended up running 30 miles because I was feeling so good about where I was at. And that was only possible because I planned for it and I prepared for it. Okay. And funnily enough, the part about going past the marathon point and running to 30 was not something that I planned for. And I hurt my knee because of it. And so that's one example of where deviating from the plan was a terrible idea. I should have known that I was not capable of running 30 miles without injury. Even though I was capable of running it, I was not capable of running it without injury. And I had to learn that. Had to learn that lesson the hard way. Okay, so with those 3 mindsets in mind, I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what I do on my week-to-week and how I utilize these mindsets on the ground, in actuality. Okay, so the main softwares that I use to plan my life, plan my weeks, plan my days is Notion, which if you don't know what Notion is, it's basically just a fancy word processor. And that's a gross oversimplification of its capabilities. And for those of you who use Notion, you'll probably be mad at me for describing this as such. But at the end of the day, what I use it for is just as a fancy online word processor. So there's Notion, and you can easily replace Notion with anything that you want. You could type this stuff out and print it out. You could just use Google Docs, or you could use Microsoft Word, whatever suits your fancy. I use Google Calendar and I use Google Tasks. And that's it. Those 3 softwares. And what I do every Sunday is I go into my Notion and I have 5 documents that I look over. Okay. Those 5 documents are first my 10-year plan, which I wrote on October 23rd of 2023. Okay, so that plan outlines what I want to have accomplished and what I want my life to look like by October 23rd of 2033. Then I have a 5-year plan, which outlines some habits and some milestones that I should have reached in order to be on track for that 10-year plan. And then that further breaks down into a 1-year plan, a 6-week plan, and a 1-week plan. Okay, so I always work my way down from 10 to 5 to 1 to 6 weeks to 1 week. And the reason I do that is to stay focused. Okay, it's really easy with all the things that are going on in the day-to-day to just get off track. Yeah, you might set a goal to increase your income or to get more in shape or to sleep better, or to become closer to your partner or to develop a better relationship with your family or whatever. And then stuff happens, right? Work gets busy. Fast food just tastes so good and is so convenient. And the gym is just so far away. Things happen and it becomes really, really easy to get off track from what you actually want. And so having a document that I visit every week and documents that break down how to bring that 10-year plan about has been huge for me. It has kept me on track. And yes, it takes a little bit of, startup work. I mean, my 10-year document is fairly detailed and it runs through what I want my career to look like. It runs through what I want my relationship with my partner to look like. It runs through what I want my hobbies to look like. It runs through what I want my relationship with myself to look like. And there are just so many things that are important to me, and I've done my best to outline all of those things in my 10-year plan, right? And so it took a little bit of work. I think I took a full 6 or 7 hours to just really get that 10-year plan, 5-year plan, 1-year plan, 6 weeks, 1 week down pat. And once you've written it, it becomes really, really easy to manage. You don't even really change the 10-year plan much. You might find a grammatical error here and there and fix it whenever you read it. But it's really that 6-week plan and 1-week plan that change a lot for me, and that I'm actually updating and changing. And then once I've read through those documents, I go to my 1-week plan, and everything that I want to get done for that week, I put on my calendar. Okay, and I put it on my calendar as a block of time. Okay, and the reason I use Google Calendar for 2 main reasons. One, when you put stuff on Google Calendar, it's very, very easy to move them around. Okay, and I'm constantly moving things around, deleting events, rescheduling events, resizing events, and adding events. Okay, those 4 tasks are constantly happening on a day-to-day basis, right? Someone might cancel or reschedule on me. Something's priority might move up, or something else's priority might move down. And it's important to be able to be flexible, and that's why I tend to shy away from hardware versions of scheduling, because they're just not dynamic enough, right? I write something down on a piece of paper or on a paper calendar or on a planner, and it's just a little too difficult to move stuff around. And the other thing that I really love about Google Calendar is your ability to make events repeatable. So my 5-year plan, which is a breakdown of the 10-year plan, is primarily just a list of habits. Okay, so I read that 10-year plan that I made, and I asked myself, what are the habits that I'm going to need to have down pat by 5 years' time, so that the compounded effect of those habits over the next 5 years brings about my 10-year plan, right? And for example, the part of my 10-year plan that talks about my level of fitness and my level of health. The habits that broke down into is very simply lifting weights 4 times a week, swimming at least once a week, doing yoga and meditation in the mornings, and rock climbing. And in order to make sure those things actually happened, I turned those into habits. And there's a habit associated with each one of those things in my 5-year plan. And every 6 weeks or so, I start to implement a new habit. Right, so at this point in the year, it's almost October. I think I have about 12 to 14 weeks left until my first year is over. And the majority of the habits that I focused on are health related. And I think the first 6 weeks after I wrote that plan, I just focused on sleep. I just focused on getting my sleep right. And now I pretty much every night, without fail, unless something comes up, I go to sleep at 8 and I wake up at 4. And I get my 8 hours, and I very rarely miss that. My morning and evening routines were next, and I very rarely miss that now. My morning meditation and morning yoga, very rarely miss that now. My morning journaling sessions, very, very rarely miss that. My reading habits, both fiction and nonfiction, I have been pumping through books this year. So those are just some examples. But going back to the Google Calendar, when you have habits like that are either daily or every other day or 4 times a week or whatever, it's very easy to go on Google Calendar and have that repeat out for the rest of your life. When I'm developing habits, I always do it from the mindset of this is something I want to do for the rest of my life. Okay, I don't ever want to stop meditating or exercising or sleeping 8 hours. So it doesn't matter how far ahead you scroll in my calendar, those things are always there. And it's relatively simple to move them around within a day. Maybe I don't get to meditate in the morning, I need to meditate in the afternoon. It's very easy to move that on the calendar. And so Google Calendar really helps make things flexible, but it's still detailed enough to put everything that I need on there. And when it comes to Google Tasks, this kind of brings us to the first of the 3 principles that I think are really important. I think that have brought me a lot of success when it comes to planning. The first principle is write everything down. Commit to the process of planning. Outsource as much as you possibly can. So I use Google Tasks because Google Tasks is linked to Google Calendar, and I can ask my phone at any time during the day. I can say, hey, Google, can you do this? Or can you remind me to do this or do that at this time, et cetera, et cetera. And immediately it'll pop it onto my calendar. And that's really easy for me. And I really leaned into this. I bought 3 Google Homes, and I live in a pretty small apartment. So I've got one in my living room, one in my bathroom, one in my bedroom, and that pretty much covers the entire apartment. And so at any point, anywhere in my apartment, I can ask Google to throw something on my calendar with relative ease. I don't even have to pick up a device. If I'm out and about, I have my phone. It's still really easy. I can use my voice on my phone. Or if I'm in a situation where I can't really talk out loud, then I can type it out. And again, the really important thing is that it automatically goes into my calendar, right? And the reason we want it to go into our calendars, we need to see it. Okay, it needs to actually have a living space in our life. Okay, it can't just be this thought of something that you want to do. It needs to have a plan associated with it. Otherwise, it's just a wish. Okay, so you really need to commit. Once you start outsourcing things, don't leave anything in your mind. And actually, one of the books that I read called Getting Things Done. I think the name of the author is David Allen. He actually recommends that when you start outsourcing stuff, that you basically do a brain dump. And every single task floating around in your head, every single idea you have for things that you might want to do in your future, every single thing, you write it out. Get it all out of your head and put it into your system in such a way that you never have to remember it ever again. That your system will remind you for you at the rate at which you want to be reminded. Okay? So that's the first principle. This is really commit. Get everything out of your head and continue to keep things out of your head. Don't let them sit in your mind. Principle number 2 is be realistic. Okay. I added this one in there because as I was coaching people on the art of planning, and also when I planned or when I was starting out planning, I grossly underestimated how much time I would need to do stuff. Essentially was overestimating my abilities to a significant degree. You know, I would assume that I would only need 30 minutes to finish a homework assignment that would actually take 2 hours. Or I would assume I would only need an hour to get my workout in, when really it would take an hour and a half. Or I'd assume that I could eat my lunch in 30 minutes, when I know that I like to take a full hour, take my time, watch an episode of something while I'm eating. And I would, instead of being realistic about my limitations as a human being and how long I would actually take to do things, I would put the idealized versions of that in my calendar, and then my calendar wouldn't work, right? I would very quickly get behind schedule because nothing I planned for myself was realistic. I assumed that I would be able to study 12 hours in a day when there was only 12 hours that I was awake, right? And I need to eat. I need to relax a little bit. There's always like transit time. I mean, I'm not a robot. I can't study for 12 hours straight, but that's what I would plan for in my calendar. And so of course I would get behind, right? And when people put stuff in their calendar, a lot of times they put things back to back to back to back. And they overestimate their endurance, right? Like you can't just switch. I mean, you can, but it sucks to switch from one task to the next, to the next, to the next, and not take any breaks. Like, hello, have you heard of burnout, people? And I would do that all the time. I would schedule stuff back to back and I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm going to get so much done today. And then I would get damn near nothing done because after about an hour, I would get behind on my schedule and then I would be demotivated. So save yourself some time and just be realistic. And part of this is, of course, experience. When you first start planning stuff out on your calendar, you simply don't have any awareness of how long you take to do things because you never needed to before. You weren't tracking it, and so who cares? And you don't actually know that you take about 45 minutes to eat a meal, or that your morning routine actually takes an hour and a half and not 20 minutes. Okay, you don't actually know that it's a 20-minute drive to work. These are things that you learn as you start to track, and you get better at being realistic. Being realistic when it comes to planning is a skill. So if you suck at it at first, that's okay. I think you kind of have to suck at it at first in order to get better at it. Just another part of being human. And the last principle, which is pretty related to the second one, is be detailed. Okay? You want your calendar and your planning to be as useful as possible. Make it as detailed as you can while still being realistic, right? With that earlier example of the commute to work, right? Maybe you know that your commute to work, according to Google Maps or Apple Maps, is 22 minutes. That's what it is for me. It's 22 minutes. But I failed to think about the fact that it takes a couple of minutes to get out of my apartment. yeah, maybe the clock strikes 7:30, but I don't just magically transport to my car. I have to walk down the stairs. I have to grab my stuff, walk down the stairs, walk to my car, start the car, and actually get moving. That's when the commute starts, right? And even once I get to work, I got to find a parking spot, which can take anywhere from 2 minutes to 7 minutes. And then I have to make the walk up to my floor of the building. And that takes a few more minutes as well. And the entire process actually takes closer to 35 minutes. And on my calendar, I was only allocating 15 to 20 minutes to get there. And I was always showing up late to work, which sucks. And I just didn't understand why. And eventually I realized that I just take time to leave my apartment. I take time to actually get from my car to my place of work. And I wasn't thinking about that stuff, and I wasn't being detailed enough. And so I wasn't planning for it. And because I wasn't planning for it, I was ending up late. I was leaving my place too late. I was getting to work too late, and I was starting work too late. And that's just something that I learned with experience, and you will learn little idiosyncrasies that you have as well. Another funny kind of quirk that I have when it comes to time is my morning routine takes about an hour to get everything done that I want to get done. And it's pretty detailed, but when I first started planning my morning routine out on my calendar, I would only allocate myself about 5 minutes for a shower. And this is because I take about 5 minutes to shower. I don't really take a whole lot longer than that. But if I know I only have 5 minutes to shower, I will intentionally, out of rebellion or out of a deep dislike for being rushed, take longer than 5 minutes. And I'll take closer to 10 or 11 minutes. But if I plan for 15 minutes in the shower, I take about 5 minutes and I'm happy and I get out. I just don't like being rushed. And I've learned that in order to stick to my time commitments better, I need to over budget time for myself. If I over budget time, I'll take as much time or a little bit less time than is actually needed. But if I under budget, I will take way longer. So that's another detail that might not necessarily be relevant to other people, but that's relevant to me. And when I take that detail into account when I'm planning, that helps my day-to-day work a lot smoother. Yeah. So those are kind of the 3 principles and the 3 mindsets. Just to recap, planning is the vehicle through which you make your goals and dreams a reality. So if you haven't been planning or you haven't been putting much emphasis on planning well, start to do it. Because yes, planning is not a substitute for actually doing the work, but it makes your work a whole lot more effective. And in a lot of cases, it's damn near impossible to start doing work unless you have a plan. Okay, mindset number 2. All that being said, plans are still a suggestion and not a promise. Okay, they are a commitment, but they're not written in stone. And in fact, it's better if they're a little bit more flexible, if they're a little bit more pliable, so that you can take advantage of and adapt to changing environments, changing situations. And mindset number 3, planning creates more freedom, not less. Right? It gives you more awareness of how much time you actually have, so you can spend that time doing the things that you actually care about. Okay, and not just blowing it on things that feel good, but you don't actually really care about. Because when we do that, we don't feel that good after the fact. We feel good during it. We feel great when we blow 3 hours on TikTok or Instagram Reels or whatever, pick your poison, YouTube. But afterwards, we feel terrible because there were things that we actually wanted to do with our life. And over the long run, a continued misappropriation and misuse of our time is really damaging to our psyche. It can really leave us feeling powerless and like we don't have a direction in life. So take that seriously. And remember that planning can help you. And when you are planning, 3 principles: be realistic, be detailed, and commit to the process. Okay, outsource as much as you actually can. Actually use your calendar, actually update it. Okay. Now, I know that was a lot of stuff, and I know this planning stuff can seem pretty overwhelming, especially at first. So I encourage you to start small. If you've never planned before, just plan the rest of your day, whatever's left of it. You can even just plan the next hour. Just take a piece of paper out and write down what you're going to do. Write the start time, write the end time, write what you're going to do, and then do it. Give yourself a quick and easy win. Once you've done that, attempt to plan a few hours out. Once you've done that, attempt to plan a whole day, then a week, then a month, then years, then 5 years, then 10 years. Sky's the limit. The more you plan and the more functional and realistic and detailed your planning are, the more you'll be able to do. The less you'll have to think about and the more you'll be able to do. And remember, there's no such thing as bad planning. There's only better planning. So if you're hesitant at all, screw that. Just get to planning. I promise you there will be some benefits to it. Okay? And if you're one of those people that has been planning your whole life, or has been planning for a pretty significant amount of time, then I encourage you to think bigger. Because bigger plans lead to bigger outcomes. Okay? Plan for things that can take years or even decades to execute. Think big. Trust in yourself and just make a plan and start working on it. Okay? You guys got this. I'm rooting for you.